Unlike observations, which allow us to see what people do and how they do it, elicitation methods allow us to find out what people think and why they think so. There are two broad types of elicitations: surveys and interviews. Surveys are generally highly structured, but in order to render useful data, they must be very well designed. We'll go over the tips on survey design in a few minutes. In addition, you have a useful handout on how to design surveys on your class website. The advantages of survey is that they're fairly quick to administer, and the researcher does not need to be present since they can be administered online. They can also be anonymous, so the participants feel more comfortable answering the questions since they do not have to make themselves vulnerable in any way. Surveys can also render very large numbers of responses, which, if analyzed quantitatively and using the proper statistical methods, are much more generalizable than qualitative data collected from one or two environments or a small number of participants. But of course, surveys prevent the researcher from doing an immediate follow-up and clarifying answers and patterns that may not be clear in the initial data, so they're not always appropriate. Interviews have their own special features. Interviews can be conducted as part of an ethnography, allowing the interview data both to be collected as the interviewees engage in the activities that the researcher is investigating, and to be combined with data from observations. Or interviews can be conducted outside the immediate community environment. Interviews can also vary in their structure. So let's look at the interview as a data collection method a little closer. Let's start with the power structure of the interview because your position as a researcher matters. Think of the following situation. If you are interviewing for a job, the interviewer, your future employer, is in the position of power with respect to you, a job applicant. Not only do you absolutely have to answer all of their questions, but you also have to guess what kind of answers they're looking for. And if you want the job, you have to find how to answer so that you come out in the best light. On the other hand, if you are asking an established professional about an informational interview about their field of work, the interviewer, that is you, is not in the position of power to demand that all their questions be answered, and the interviewee has no obligation to try and provide the answer that the interviewer will like. As you can see, the respective power alignment between the interviewer and interviewee has a lot of impact on what kind of information the interviewer is going to be able to collect. The same dynamics apply in research. Moreover, whether we are observing or interviewing, we need to be mindful of the observer's paradox, a phenomenon first proposed by William Labov. The paradox consists in the researcher wanting to observe the normal, routine behavior of the participants, but the participants, knowing that they are being observed, modify their behavior, often subconsciously, to either hide undesirable traits or bring them forward as a form of resistance. Interviews are not immune to the observer's paradox. When the respondent tries to provide the answers that are designed to either appease or shock the interviewer, rather than to represent the respondent's true thoughts. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, one type of interviews is structured. Such interviews are highly controlled by the researcher, require responses to very specific questions, and are usually quite informative. But at the same time, they're fairly restricted in that the interview protocol cannot be deviated from, and the interviewer has to continue to ask the set of predetermined questions and cannot probe beyond what the respondents provide. Unstructured interviews allow for a lot more wiggle room and a lot more information controlled by the respondents. Since the respondents can provide more information that is technically not asked for, or elaborate on open-ended questions, the researcher can easily ask follow-up or clarification questions as the need for them comes up, even if they're not in the protocol. These interviews are generally very rich and very informative, but they do call for quite a bit more analysis time and may require the researcher to revise their coding scheme in response to the themes that actually emerge rather than the themes the researcher thought would emerge. Let's go back to surveying for a minute and discuss some of the tips on how to conduct surveys. In conducting a survey, the researcher is usually detached or not even present. A survey can be administered via mail, online, or by researchers or research assistants who position themselves as mere folks on the phone or the clipboard who were given the job of asking questions from a list. Questions on surveys are generally close-ended and allow for multiple choice or short responses. But in order to provide useful information, they need to be neutral. For example, if you want to know what kind of pets people like, you may ask, do you prefer dogs, cats, turtle, or birds? But a question worded in a different way is sure to get you skewed results. For example, you cannot say, do you prefer loud, barky, nasty dogs, slow and stupid turtles, birds that poop everywhere, or cuddly, adorable cats as pets? You see, that question was not neutral. It is also important in a survey to ask one thing at a time. Do not ask, do you like cats and why do you like them? Split that into two questions, one about the type of the pet your respondents might like, and another about the reasons for their preferences. And by the way, do not ask questions about pets on the sociolinguistic survey. If you choose a multiple choice or multiple answer formats, keep your answers balanced so that one trait does not overwhelm others. And finally, it is always a good idea to test drive your survey, and interview questions too, by the way, before embarking on the data collection. A small pilot of your instrument allows you to see the problems in your questions and correct them before you get to the actual gathering of the data. Now, let's take another short break and reconvene for the discussion of our third data collection method, material tracing.